Hey, it's another Thursday Live. You are welcome. If you're just tuning in, you're welcome. Yes, this is Thursday Live with me, Dr. Jen D. Botti, and we are here to share on another insightful topic, leader or follower. Which are you raising? If you're just joining in, you're welcome. Please invite someone else to be part of this very important conversation. We're going to be talking about people pleasing. Basically, our focus for today is people pleasing, but I want you to answer the question by the end of this session. Are you raising a leader or are you raising a follower? And if you have already picked up the cue, this is a prelude to the Purposeful Parenting Conference that comes up on the 16th and 17th of May. That is next week in Yaoundé. Have you gotten your ticket? So if you're watching this and you are in Yaoundé or you can be in Yaoundé, trust me, you do not want to miss this conference. It's going to come up annually. This is the first edition. But every year, we are going to meet together at the conference to share on insightful purpose parenting topics. So today we're talking about whether or not you are raising a leader or hope you're not raising a follower. We're trying to learn today about the things that we do when it comes to parenting that nurtures people pleasing in children, that causes a child to grow up to become an adult that is a people pleaser. Trust me, if there is one thing you can do for your child that will truly make a difference for them, it will be to raise them to not be a people pleaser, but to be a purpose chaser. All right? To not be a person who is chasing approval, but a person who chases purpose. The life of a purpose chaser is a life of fulfillment. That is the ideal life. A life where you are able to pursue and fulfill what it is that you were put here on earth to accomplish. That is what it should be. That is the ultimate. Raising a person who is not driven by the approval of others, but is driven by the necessity, driven by their purpose, driven by their contribution to society and not just wanting to please everybody every time. It's a burden. It's such a huge burden that when you watch people around who are people pleasers, you see how much of a burden it is to people who are so caught up in this web of constantly trying to keep people around them happy, often to their own detriment. It's a burden. It's a burden. That's why, as a parent, trust me, you don't want this for your child. All right? You don't want this for your child. You want to raise a child who is secure. You want to raise a child who is assertive, not disrespectful, but assertive, right? Who is able to stand their ground. I love using the example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three Hebrew boys. There were four of them with Daniel, right? And when you see three teenage boys who are able to stand their ground and say, no, we will not disrespectfully, all right? So it's not about disrespect. Being assertive, it's not about being disrespectful, but it's about understanding that, you have a voice and you can use your voice. So there are many adults today who do not have a voice. There are many adults today who are caught in the web of people pleasing. It is such a burden because they are constantly worried about what every person will say. And here is the thing. One of the things I've noticed is that the parents who have the hardest time transitioning their parenting style, I've worked with parents who truly want to, have a better relationship with their children, who really want to practice some of the things that, you've heard me teach all along. But their challenge is the people around them, approval of those around them often defeats them. The fact that people don't approve of what they're doing, when people question them, they suddenly just, get discouraged or just want to abandon it altogether. People pleasing will affect so many aspects of a person's life, including your marriage choices, other life choices, who you are in a relationship with, how you accept to be treated, and all of those things. So trust me, it's something that you want to be careful not to raise your child to become. So leadership is not about seeking approval. Now, when I talk about leadership, I'm not just talking about, again, a person who is heading an establishment, all right? Yes, that is a form of leadership, but the primary form of leadership is the leadership of self, all right? And then there is private leadership, and then there is public leadership, okay? So there's personal leadership, which is you being able to lead yourself. So it's not about approval. Ideal leadership is not about approval. It's about being able to stand for something. What are your values? That's what it's essentially about. You being able to stand for something. What do I believe? Why do I do what I do? Now, every child has the potential to be a leader. In fact, every person is born with an innate, an innermost self confidence. If you look at children when they are still very young, they are not too conscious of. If you look at a child, for example, that has a malformation, when that child is still very little, you see them carrying themselves with so much confidence. They are not yet, it's almost as though they do not see the difference between them and others. There is still that confidence, that innermost confidence that the child has about themselves, about the world around them, right? But as the child grows, this changes. As the child grows, this changes. So every child has that potential to be a leader. Every child is born with a voice. And what happens along the way, that child who was born confident with a wholesome, perception of self, becomes an individual who always thinks that they are second to others, who always thinks that their opinion does not really matter, who is always eager to please other people, who struggles with saying no, even when they know that they cannot handle what they're being asked to do. They just don't know how to say no. I had a parent reach out to me to tell me, Doc, I'm really struggling. You know, I struggle with being able to say no. I find myself sometimes constantly burdened, struggling with so many things, but yet I find myself, people ask me to do something for them. I cannot say no. I don't know what's happening. And we had a conversation about her childhood. We looked at the sort of things that she went through to try to help her see where it's coming from, but also to help her find the way forward, to help her be able to learn to become more assertive. It's very important. That's why people pleasing is an obstacle to true leadership, because a true leader cannot proceed by constantly seeking approval from those that they are leading. There are times in leadership where you're going to make decisions that everyone might not be able to understand it. No one might even agree with you, just you. And a people pleaser cannot be able to function under such conditions, because as soon as one person starts disagreeing with the idea, they are already, shaking in the knees. So a good leader needs to be grounded. You cannot be constantly swayed by every other person's approval. There are parents who are struggling with parenting today because they are led by popular opinion. A people pleasing parent will struggle with parenting, having a wholesome relationship with their child as well, because the bulk of what they believe and what they do to their child, how they interact with their child, is largely shaped by what those around them think. I've had parents who've told me that, this is what happened. My child did this, and I was trying to ask different people, what do you usually do when this happens? So they asked a series of people, and then they found out what most people were saying and decided on what to do. Imagine that your parenting is governed by what every other person is saying. Meanwhile, you are the one who is supposed to know this child better than any other person. It will always put you at a disadvantage. I love to quote the example of parents who have a toddler, and the toddler is having a public tantrum. As much as that puts any normal person under pressure, a people pleaser in that instance will likely do what the crowd is telling them to do. Beat that naughty child, do this to your child. Everyone's going to have, they will always have an opinion. Every other person will always have an opinion about how you should do what you're supposed to be doing. That's why leadership is hard when a person is a people pleaser. It's very tough for a people pleaser to be a wholesome leader, because you're constantly going to be swayed by what every other person thinks. How should I do this? Should I even start? And pursuing purpose largely has to do with you understanding that no other person has seen the vision that you have seen from the inception, from the onset. The beginning is usually the hardest part, because people will not always just initially just buy into your idea. So the greatest inventions in the world were understood by just the person who was, trying to pursue that innovation. No one understood them at the time. And that's okay, right? They were able to break through because the fact that they believed it was enough. They didn't need every other person validating it before they pursue it. But I'm sure you must know someone who, you have a project in mind, it's really beautiful, you've had a great idea, but you're going around looking for everybody to validate it before you're able to start. So every child is born with the potential to be a leader. But the key is actually nurturing purpose instead of fear. All right. So people pleasing is backed by certain fears. What will people say? They'll think I'm a bad person. They're constantly worried about what every other person is going to think or say or believe about them. So there is a shaky foundation of self. Their self perception is not wholesome. So it's not wholesome. They don't think well of themselves. They depend on external validation to feel good about themselves. So their self esteem depends on the validation they get from others when they do certain things for them. That's why the people pleaser is constantly exhausted, constantly pressed on them because they are trying to do everything for everyone else just so they can get approval. It's a burdensome life. It's a burdensome life. And there are so many adults living that life today. Living the life today. So parenting choices shape future leaders or followers, whether you agree or not. This is a fact. All right. How just you see these simple day-to-day interactions we have with our children, they are more powerful than many parents realize. The words you speak to your child, the cumulate, meaning that it adds up, right, to end up shaping the child's belief of self. There are so many things you believe about yourself today as an adult that were implanted when you were younger. It starts from there. So people pleasing has its roots far back in childhood. That's where it has its roots from. But many of us don't realize it. And here is the catch, right? A people pleaser is most likely to also raise a people pleaser. Because that's what you believe. You believe that, the way to go in life is to constantly ensure that every other person validates what you're doing. So you're going to try to impose that on your children, to always get them to seek your approval before they do anything. So decision making is going to be far from them. All right. So leadership is all about taking initiative. It's all about making decisions. A leader is a person who is able to make decisions. All right, and inspire action in others. Now, when you watch somebody who is a leader, the fact that their boldness in making decisions, in taking risks, and all those things, it inspires others. So followers are usually the ones that are being inspired by the leader just doing their leading. All right. So, but followers, on the other hand, are people who will constantly need to just ask everybody what they think before they are able to take even the smallest step. So it's not necessarily about don't think about leader and follower just from the term from the perspective of let me say a hierarchical structure or public leadership. All right, leadership, like I've said earlier, it starts with self. It starts on a personal level. So there is a big difference in the mindset of a leader and that of a follower. That's usually where the dividing line is. The mindset of a leader is quite different from that of a follower, because a leader is a person who is not afraid to fail. All right, who's not afraid to take risks, who's not afraid to take up challenges. But followers usually are too afraid to fail that they would rather not try. That's why if you're with me yesterday on the live session we had on Facebook, one of the things I said was that we must be intentional about nurturing the love for learning in our children. And we do that by making sure that we eradicate every fear of failure. Failure is not the end on your parenting journey. It's not the end. Your child must get that lesson, that failure is not the end. It's a lesson. It's not the end. So the difference in mindset is what really makes the dividing line between a follower and a leader. All right. So leaders trust their instincts. They pursue purpose. So their decisions are not necessarily based on what people will say, right? But they are more based on what needs to be done with regard to what they are trying to accomplish. That's what shapes their decisions. So it's not really about whether you're going to like it or not. This is my decision because this is what I'm pursuing. But the follower is the complete opposite of that. Before they take steps, they want to make sure if anybody disagrees with them, that already causes delay, because they will spend their time trying to convince you, to buy you over, to get you to see the idea, before they can feel comfortable enough to be able to proceed with it. What a burden. What a burdensome life. All right. So followers often seek validation and they avoid discomfort. Why? Because they are constantly trying to stay safe. Constantly trying to stay safe. Because failure to them is like the end. You're going to bring a disapproval that they do not want. So they would rather just stay safe and just do, the challenge that fuels growth is constantly far from them because they would rather just stay safe so that they avoid failure at all costs. So avoiding failure is something that is going to limit you. You can't truly grow and keep making progress in any aspect of your life if you are constantly trying to remain comfortable. Now think about those who have made history, in look back, years back, right? You're going to see that the greatest people are people who were able to stand for something, even when it was not a popular idea. Most people who bring significant change are able to accomplish this one thing. Usually they start with an idea, they have a conviction, and they stick to that conviction. Even if nobody backs them up, they stick to that conviction until eventually people are only able to see it later. And that's what it means to pursue purpose. I often say that the purposeful parent is one who pursues their goal and not popular opinion. You can't go by popular opinion, especially when it comes to parenting. You can't go by popular opinion. If you're waiting for everyone to endorse what you're doing, you're going to do your child a disadvantage. If you wait for everyone to see it from your perspective, that's why it's very important to have a why for your how. Because your why is what helps you to go uphill against the crowd. There will be certain things that you'll be doing on your purpose parenting journey that other people will not agree, talk less of understand why you're choosing to do it that way. But you're doing it that way because you have a why. So the starting point for any purposeful parent that helps you to be able to keep going, even against popular opinion, is your why. Why must you do it this way and not that way? That's why when parents sign up for courses, this is one of the areas where we emphasize. It's important to get knowledge. Now, if you tell a parent, maybe a parent comes to gift your child who is 2 years old a tablet, and you say, "Oh no, well, this is a nice gift, thank you, but we can't really accept that because we're not really going to use it." And they're like, "Oh, how can you say this? Are you trying to say that me who's doing it for my child? I don't know what I'm doing." A people pleaser was what at that point will start feeling compelled to accept the gift. All right. Or someone is telling you, okay, a typical example that I often face with parents is when their own parents, their children's grandparents, start, making statements like, "Are you saying that I did not raise you well? Are you saying that, I did not know what I'm doing? Are you trying to say that I was an ignorant person?" And they start panicking. They start panicking. So why are you trying to cancel everything I did to raise you? None of that. So you cannot truly be impactful as a parent if you do not have a why for your how. Why are you doing what you're doing the way you're doing it? You need to understand that. You need to have an understanding. If you choose to work on your yelling and become a parent that is mostly calm and peaceful, why are you doing it that way? Why is it essential for you to practice not yelling constantly at your children? There is a backing, there's a reason why you need to do the work to create a peaceful environment around your child or your children. Why are you choosing to schedule this and not that? Purposeful parenting thrives on knowledge. You can't defend something you have not understood. You can't. And many times when you find yourself in a situation where every other person is going left and you're the only one going right, that's when whether you're a leader or a follower is actually going to be tested. Can you keep going left even though everyone is going right? Just because you have a why that you're pursuing. Sometimes your why will take you completely opposite to every person, completely in the opposite direction. Completely. And if you are not grounded, you're going to struggle at that point. All right. So let's see how people pleasing limits leadership and purpose. Now, many people unknowingly shape their lives around approval seeking, constantly wanting every person to validate what they're doing. And this has at the background of it the fear of rejection. The fact that nobody, you're feeling like everybody's going to reject you. If you don't agree with them, they are not going to like me if I don't agree with them and all of that. So you often hesitate to take risk, to share your ideas or to challenge what is the normal. Sometimes the normal is nonsense. But I've seen people who have the knowledge, they understand why this thing is not an advantage for a child, and yet when they find themselves in front of certain people, they cannot speak up. They struggle. They struggle at that moment because in that moment, their fear of being rejected, being criticized is far greater than what they know. So, people pleasing is going to stand in the way of purposeful parenting if you do not work on it. All right, it can bring you to actually compromise your values, and this is the truth for children as well. A child who is a people pleaser, who is raised to be a people pleaser, is going to be vulnerable to peer pressure. That's why when I talk about this topic that is coming up for the conference we're going to have in Yaoundé next week, is very crucial because the reason why we see a growing trend of teenagers who are behaving madly, because the teenage years are at the peak of that's where they are vulnerable to their peers. Now, the child that will be able to resist peer pressure must be a child that has a secure sense of self. It has to be a child that was intentionally raised to not be a people pleaser. Because there'll be times when your child will have to make a decision that will be against what the popular decision is for every other person. And they might be put away by their friends. Will your child be able to stand in that kind of situation? Maybe everyone is going for this party and everyone is trying it, everyone is trying it, everyone is trying to smoke, everyone is trying something. And that's the popular thing. And anyone who does not go in that direction is being teased as being a nerd, being a weirdo, being somebody that, they tease you, they start calling you funny names. We had people like this in our class growing up. When we were in secondary school, there were people, and now when I look back at those kids, I'm like, I need to go back and study how these people how their parents raised them. Because I remember we had some people in my class in high school in particular I used to consider them as weird because they were not interested in being part of the popular side. I used to be part of the popular side as well. They were not interested in being on the popular side. They were so grounded that you could see that the confidence, you could see their assertiveness in saying, I'm not going to be part of that. I do not do that. It's so amazing when you see a child that's able to do that. But it takes intentionality right from those early years when you're raising up the child. I often ask parents this question. If your child cannot say no to you, who do you expect them to be able to say no to? Think about it. If you're the big bad person in your child's life and your child cannot fathom the thought of saying no to you, but you expect them to go and say no to a bully in school or to a bigger child who is forcing them to do something that's against their values, how is that going to happen? How do you want your child to say no to a teacher who is proposing something to them that is against their values? When at home, your child is punished for saying no. Parenting is not for the faint-hearted. Because I know how challenging it is when a child tells you no blatantly in your face. I think I had one of my kids tell me no. I think it was 2 days ago or something. I still get those. It's frustrating. All right. But this is the thing. You want your child to be an independent thinker. You want your child to be able to have their own mind, have their own ideas. That's where skillfulness needs to come in. Because the reason why we are so compelled to use force and control is because we lack the skillfulness to help us get our children to cooperate. If you've been following me on doing these Thursday live sessions, I've taught here that cooperation is a higher goal than blind obedience. Because the cost of blind obedience is self-esteem, is the child's own ability to think for themselves. That's the cost of it. So yes, you're going to get what you want when you use force, when you compel the child, when you blackmail the child emotionally even. You will get what you want. But then what will be the cost of constantly using control instead of seeking the higher road, which is cooperation? Cooperation requires influence, not force. The greatest leaders are people of influence and not dictatorship. They're not dictators. The greatest leaders inspire cooperation instead of forced obedience. So if your parenting is hinged only on control and force, it's going to be costly because eventually you're going to end up with a child who is just who believes that their voice doesn't matter, their ideas don't count. They're constantly going to just be trying to escape punishment, to seek your approval, and to get you to say, that's good. The child can't feel good about themselves unless they hear those things from you. There's something wrong with that. All right. So there's something wrong with that. The constant need to make other people happy can lead a person to suppress their own beliefs. Think about children. Let's go back to the teenage years when a child is in secondary school, for example. There are some kids in secondary school who are constantly just blowing, dancing to the tune of every other person. I remember there were kids like that in my school who were just like passepartout everywhere. They're popular, quite all right, but they are like puppets, always dancing to the tune of whoever is the popular person at that time. So a child loses their authenticity when they are raised to be a people pleaser. You can't be authentic when you're a people pleaser. It's not possible to be authentic because your thoughts will constantly be driven by, if I do this, will they like it? If I do that, will it make them happy with me? If I do this, so before you even think or say anything, your 10 times your first instinct is to worry about what every other person will think about what you're about to do. What every other person is going to think about what you're about to do. So you must look back, start from looking at your own childhood. How was I raised? Look at this conversation of transforming your parenting approach must start from you evaluating your childhood, because our childhood, every person's childhood, is the first school of parenting they attended. I elaborated on this very well in my upcoming book. I really pray you do get a copy. All right, that book, I've read it before putting it out, I've read it like 5 times. So it is there's a lot of in-depth information there about how to go back and review your own childhood, the things you should be looking for. How was I raised? What were those beliefs, those behaviors that I inherited? All right. So parents raised as people pleasers will pass down approval seeking tendency to their children unintentionally. Because this parent, okay, let me just give you a simple example. Let me say your child is about to go and visit maybe a relative, and the child maybe in that place does something or says something, and the child comes back to you, but your primary concern is, now how auntie be thinking about us? Auntie will think that we are bad. So you start, your worries in that moment is more about what the person your child was with will think about them. You don't want them to think about you like that. When you go there, make sure you're like this. So you're priming your child to become overly conscious of what other people think about them, instead of doing the opposite. Children will be children. But when you start priming your child to be constantly, excessively aware of what other people think, you're going to raise them to be a people pleaser. So you're going to pass down your approval seeking tendency to your children. Now, you must also realize that your upbringing shapes your future actions as well. So if a parent grew up avoiding conflict, that's another aspect of people pleasing. People who are people pleasers don't want to fight. Not really necessarily because they are peace lovers. They might still be bitter or even angry at what you did. But they would rather not say what has annoyed them in what you did, because they are still too afraid that you will think of them as bad. People pleasers avoid conflict. If you are a person who is constantly avoiding conflict, you would rather leave it than say what you think or say what offends. That's why the EI classes are really a blessing. One of the things we learn in EI is how to express yourself. It's very important. All right, how to express yourself without casting blame on the other person. How to say how something that was done affected you, affected your emotions. You have to be able to vocalize that. It's a big part of being able to be assertive. You have to be able to vocalize it. How, if somebody's actions, crosses a boundary. EI is not about being nice all the time. Recently someone reached out to me and wanted something from me. Something that, was not a right, definitely not. Is something that is almost like you go to a place and you purchase something, and then 6 months later you come back and you want to switch it, and you're expecting, and the person made a comment like, that your EI that you're teaching, we'll see how you practice it now. Almost as though EI is all about you just being nice all the time. not having boundaries. So people don't understand rules and regulations. They think a people pleaser often has the perspective that every other person should be so worried about what you're thinking of them. If you carry that on your shoulders, you cannot run the race that you're on this earth to run, because you're constantly carrying on your shoulders the burden of other people's opinions. People will always have opinions about you. That is one thing that you can do nothing about. They will always have opinions about you, about what you're doing, about how you should do it, even. All right? So, upbringing will shape your future actions. Now, many adults blame indecisiveness, sorry, battle indecisiveness and fear of rejection. That's another aspect of it. Being indecisive. Trust me, decision making is a flex, because there is so much about life and pursuit of purpose that is hinged upon a person's ability to make decisions constantly, confidently. Decision making is a part of life that you cannot avoid. But there are some people who find themselves in the habit of procrastinating because they constantly try to avoid having to make a decision. Do you know why? Because they are afraid to fail. You know, the longer you can put off a decision, the longer you can put off the possibility of failing. So the possibility of failing, that keeps them from even making a decision altogether. Because if I don't decide, I can't fail if I don't decide. I can't fail if I don't decide. So it becomes a struggle in adulthood. Why? Because remember I've said childhood is a training ground in preparation for adulthood. It, a normally functioning adult is a person who is equipped and has had practice in decision making. This is something that might seem so simple, but children are often robbed of the opportunities to practice proper decision making early on in life. So many of us are struggling today as adults because we never had the chance to practice decision making and fail often and learn from it. That's the blessedness of childhood. Having the opportunity to fail at a time when the cost of failure is slim to none. The cost of failing in childhood is very slim compared to adult failures. In adulthood, failures are costly. Usually, it has a big price tag. But in childhood, you are still under the guidance and protection of your parents. Failing at that time is less costly. It's a rich experience. But when children don't get the chance to practice decision making, to practice making decisions, being able to choosing the wrong thing and embracing whatever comes with that wrong choice they made, learning from it, trying again, that's how a child practices. That's what actually prepares them for adulthood. So parents who still seek approval for every single thing will raise children who have a similar tendency. So the cycle keeps continuing. So people pleasers raise people pleasers who raise other people pleasers until someone stands up and tries to break that cycle. I hope that you're going to be a cycle breaker. All right. Let's see the common mistakes we make that causes us to raise people pleasers, raise followers instead of leaders. Firstly, if you're constantly over controlling your child's decisions, deciding for your child. I had a parent I worked with who, were discussing, I think their child was going back to boarding school, and she was like, oh, I think we're trying to set up a meeting. And she kept on saying, oh, no, her child, I think her child was in Form 5 or so. She can't come for the meeting because she has to go do shopping for her child. Since she's going by herself, there are a lot of things she has to buy. I'm like, wow, all right, you have a child in Form 5. What happened to, by Form 5, I was already doing my shopping by myself, long before that even. All right. So these are things that the intention is always good. And here is a micro reason why parents unintentionally take over all decisions for their children. It is the fear of failure still. Your child can't fail if you take over the decision making for them. Isn't that true? Now, the chances, many parents are thinking like, oh, this child is still young, is still foolish. If I choose the school, I'll choose better. If I do the shopping, I'll be able to bargain better. I'll be able to do everything better. So you end up finding yourself overtaking everything and robbing your child of the opportunity to practice. And that practice builds skills that instills confidence. When parents ask me, how can I help my child to be more self confident? I will say, get them more involved. Get them more involved. Children who struggle with confidence are children who have been robbed of opportunities to practice, develop the skills they need. A competent child is a confident child. The more competent your child is, the more skills your child has, the more confident they become. That's why parents don't think about teaching kids things like, how to make friends, how to approach people. You know, a child who has been taught, who has had the opportunity to practice, no matter whether they're an introvert or an extrovert. I have introverts, but we constantly have these sessions where we do role playing. I teach my children how to approach strangers, how to approach people when you need something instead of just sitting there and dying in silence. Teaching your kids how to ask for help is a life skill. Did you know that? It's a life skill. Your child must know how and when to ask for help. There is a when to ask for help. Sometimes you see people who are struggling with something and it's so hard for them to turn and say, please, can you help me with this? Some people are unable to ask for help. It's not an advantage. It's not an advantage. So, over controlling decisions, constantly making choices for your child, unintentionally teaches that child that their opinions don't matter or that they are not capable of making right decisions. Let me take it over again. When you constantly make decisions for your children, you are unintentionally communicating to them that their opinions don't matter, one, and secondly, that they are not able to make right decisions. So the child loses confidence in their ability to decide. There are certain kids you say, do you want rice or beans? Child will say, let me go and ask my mother. Have you ever met kids like that? Let me go and ask my mother. In our culture, we'll be like, wow, what a well brought up child, what a well cultured boy. The things we praise sometimes so reflects our ignorance. A child that can't decide what their stomach will eat. And some will come back and say, I come under the comment section and say, wow, that's a well cultured child. You want to check everything. And this is because this child has not had practice making decisions. In fact, sometimes they're even afraid to decide because they're afraid that the parent will be angry. This is why this fear of failure is something that you must work on. First, for yourself as a parent, because the reason why you're taking over all the decisions is because you are afraid that the child will fail. The parent who is waking up at night to read with their child, to wake their child and sits there. You're not the one having GCE, but you at night, you work during the day, come at night again, you're up 3 hours because your child was reading. You have to be there to make sure they don't sleep. You are more afraid of their failure than they are. And that is not okay. That is not okay. You raise a child who is going to completely lack confidence in themselves and in their ability. You want to raise a child who will be a leader. It needs certain dose of confidence. You cannot be a great leader if you lack self-confidence. You need to have an amount of a healthy dose of self-confidence. Leadership really, really thrives on self-confidence. You need to be able to be confident. Because those who are following you are watching, you don't know when you're not confident in your decisions. As somebody who has had the opportunity to lead in so many different places, people know, they can sense it when you are not confident in what you're saying. All right. I remember there was a time I sat down with one of my colleagues and we were discussing a case in the ward. And the fun fact is, we were talking, I was sharing with them what I thought was the way a particular drug was supposed to be given. While they were sharing, there were two of them against me. So I was sharing what I thought was what I knew was the way this drug is being administered. They were sharing a different version of the same idea. The fun fact is that we were both correct. All right. This particular drug could be given in two different ways. I had mastered my way and they had mastered the other way. So we both knew two sides of the same coin. But the way I sold mine made them to eventually doubt what they believed about the drug. So when they came back the next day, they was like, wow, the way you sold yours, we actually thought we were wrong. And they had to go back and go and check and came back and said, you were right. We eventually bought your idea. So how the confidence with which you sell yourself, you sell the decisions you're making. is very crucial for leadership. People can smell self-doubt from miles away. All right. So overprotecting from failure does not help children. Shielding children from consequences prevents them from developing resilience. Allowing children to fail is an important part of childhood training. There are so many parents who will go the extra mile to buy exams, to bribe people, to pay 10 teachers. They just want to make sure that this child is constantly succeeding. And if you live a life of constant success as a child, I'm sorry for you in adulthood. You are in for a shocker because there is no perfect life. A child who has been so shielded from failure is a child that is you're preparing for disaster tomorrow. Because they're not going to be used to having no for an answer. They have no experience with failure. The first failure might break them down. They're not used to rejection. So overprotecting your child from failure robs them of the experience they're going to get with the consequences of failure. That's where the learning actually is. All right, which helps them develop resilience. They become tough. That's how you raise a tough individual. It's not by beating a child. That's not how you raise a tough person. I know people who are beaten, but today, when challenge comes, you see them, they crumble. They can't. Because they might have been beaten, but they still lack that resilience that is required to push through a challenge without fainting. They still lack it. So teaching compliance over autonomy. Always insisting, just do it because I said so. Why are you questioning me? There are parents who do not allow their children to question their decisions, or question anything that they are doing. It's my way or the hard way. Such a mindset, such an approach will raise a child that will end up losing their voice. A child who was not given a voice, as a child, becomes an adult who has nothing to say. When you are constantly robbed of the opportunity to speak your mind as a child, you end up becoming an adult who has nothing to say. I don't have anything to say. Why? Because you eventually learn that your opinions don't count. All right? You learn that your opinions don't count. So constant criticism as well. Now, this has it's a two-sided coin, because constant criticism and excess praise will raise a child who's a people pleaser. Let me tell you how excess praise does it. That's a part that we don't usually realize that it actually does so. All right. Now, there are some children or some parents who would over cajole a child, like they will overpraise you to do something, and then when you do it, they're going to shower you again with praises. You're going to raise a child who's going to be addicted to that praise, to the point where they will not feel that something they have done is well done until somebody tells them it is well done. That's another aspect of people pleasing, that you can't be able to appreciate your progress, appreciate the work you're doing, except someone validates it. And the other end, of course, is criticism, where the parent is constantly overly critical. It's going to cause the child to become overly aware of other people's opinions as well. There are people who are just constantly on the lookout for people criticizing them. So they're just trying to always be on the right path. They don't want anybody to criticize them. Being overly critical of your child can cause your child to constantly be walking on eggshells, where they are constantly just being cautious of people criticizing them. They want to always just do everything right. And this is going to keep them from taking on opportunities, or even trying to take up challenges, because they are just constantly afraid of being criticized. I gave the example, I think yesterday, of a scenario where you give your child a task to do, the child does the task, and then sees something outside of that task that could also be done, and decides to take initiative and do it. But when you return, the first thing you do is to criticize the fact that, why did you first of all even try to do the one I didn't ask you? That's where you focus on, you criticize, you yell. What it tells that child is that the next time I try to step out of my comfort zone to do something, I could get criticized, so I better not try. So it's about balance. When it comes to criticism and praise, you need to be able to find the balance. You must need to be able to find the middle point, because excessive praise as well will raise a child who will think that what they have done is not okay unless somebody tells them it is. All right. So, how then do you raise a leader? Time is gaining on us. How then do you raise a leader? A child who chases purpose instead of approval. A child who is able to, think about this. When you read the story of Moses, one of the reasons why Moses is one of the greatest leaders after Jesus of the Bible, there are so many instances in there where you would understand why Moses had to be raised in a palace. An average person, an average slave would not have been able to cope with that kind of pressure. There was a lot of pressure from the Israelites on Moses. A lot of pressure. They questioned his decisions when they began suffering. And here is the thing: as a leader, one of the consequences of being a leader is that you get to carry the blame. When it's working, the blame is yours. When it's failing, the blame is yours. So if you're constantly afraid of failing, you would keep making safe decisions and you might hardly be able to break through. Leadership is about being prepared to make tough decisions, but that can also bring big rewards, just like they can also bring great failure. So there were things that Moses, you saw Moses doing in the Bible, that when he was leading the Israelites, they were constantly complaining, constantly criticizing him. And still you would see him making decisions. This is what we're supposed to do. And he kept pushing on. Many people would have quit. So many would have quit. A typical people pleaser would not have been able to even go, even if it's just crossing the Red Sea. They would not have been able to do it. All right. So, how to raise a leader? A child who chases purpose and not approval. The very first thing you must bear in mind is you need to encourage independent thinking, independent decision making. Let children make choices and be held accountable for the outcome. It seems very simple, but it's very powerful. Involving children in decision making, not deciding everything over. There are certain major areas where the parent needs to come in, but you can't try to decide everything for your child. Because the reason you're doing is because you're afraid. You see, if you don't let me choose, you go and choose something that is not okay. So that your fear of failure will grossly limit your child. So you need to work on your own fear of failure. Your child's failure is not your failure. It's a lesson for them, first and foremost. Your child's failure is not your failure. It is a lesson for the child. That's why you must step aside. So you need to encourage decision making by allowing the child make small choices. It starts with small choices. By the time a child gets to the teenage years, they should be able to make bigger decisions progressively as they grow older, because you're preparing this child to leave your home. You must always remind yourself about that. That if you're focused on deciding everything for your child, then you're not helping them, because eventually you get to 18, you start saying, oh, why are you not a big boy? Why can't you do this for yourself? How are you so? And then you start criticizing the child again. This is a child for whom you have made all decisions from when they were born to when they were about to leave home. And then suddenly they are now an independent adult, and you are constantly criticizing them for not being able to make decisions or for making foolish decisions all the time. They've not had practice. So children must make small choices. It starts with very small choices. What to wear, for example. All right. While your kids are in a space where the cost is not so great. For example, kids going out to church, dressing properly matters, but staying at home not so much. You could let them practice from there. As they get better, they can now start picking their outfits to go out. That's how you teach. All right. There are parents who insist on choosing right down to the underwear. They want to choose every single thing. Before the child comes out, they've already put out your clothes for the day. My kids start picking out their outfits from when they are one going on to age 2. You have your cupboard, you have your space where your clothes are. They go and they pick up, and we put what needs to be worn for certain periods of the day. So yes, it's a choice they're making, but it's also a choice that is made within certain confines, because you don't want your child to be overwhelmed, from trying to choose from too many options at the same time. Right? For smaller children. So the second thing you want to do is to celebrate effort, not outcome. Celebrate effort. Many times we are so focused on, did you take first? So if the result is not what you wanted, the child will only hear criticism. Meanwhile, there's a lot you're overlooking. You're teaching your child to be very outcome focused instead of process focused. What is more important is the process. Because if the process is right, the outcome cannot be wrong. There's no way. If the process is gotten right, the outcome is inevitably right. But if you make a mess in the process, you might still get, a proper outcome. But you want to make sure that your child understands where to address, correction. That's why we have kids today who are very focused on copying from their friends during exams because their focus is only on the outcome. They don't have any care about the process of how they get to the outcome. What matters to them is just that they get the result they need, the result that's going to bring them, the approval they are seeking. When you're too approval focused, it can often lead you to go, to compromise your values. It can often lead you to compromise your values. Now, the third thing you want to pay attention to is allowing healthy risk taking. Leaders are risk takers. What am I talking about? Now, there are certain things that children would, for example, kitchen skills. There's so many parents. I remember there was a time I told a friend of mine that I started teaching my kids to iron their clothes from the time they're age 6. And she was like, "What? How can you do that? Your child can burn themselves. Your child can this." I said, till date, none of my children has ever burned themselves because if you take the time and teach well and supervise well the practice, you can actually get your children to do things that are dangerous in a way that does not hurt them. And I was like, "No, that's too early. It's too young. You're exaggerating." I'm like, "Really?" So this kind of mindset will have you keeping children till when they're maybe 12, or you start thinking that it's safe enough for them to handle an iron. Again, I'm not saying go and give your child an iron and just say begin to iron. No, it's training and practice. Children can be taught a home. When we watch these videos, when parents come to my home and say, "Oh, your kids are too young to be in the kitchen to be frying, frying pancake or frying," my kid started frying pancake when he was age 3, the last born. The other one started a bit later, age 4, 5. But he, by age 3, he was so persistent that we finally, had to accommodate him in the kitchen to get him to do it safely. And he was able to do it till date, no burn. Because there is a how. And one of the questions you must ask yourself is, how do you avoid getting burned? Can the same material cause you harm? The question is yes. The same knife that you use to cut things in the kitchen can also hurt you. When we watch the video of Chinese and Japanese, we see kids in kindergarten who not only cook, but they make the fire by themselves. And we are quiet. But then you come to someone's home and say your child is too young to be frying pancake. But when you see it online, you're like, wow, why can't we think that we, with the color of our skin, can also do the same thing? It's because most times we are too afraid for the children that we end up limiting them. We end up not being able to train or to teach because we are too afraid of failure. We are gripped by fear. We are limited by our fears. So you must allow a certain amount of risk taking is needed, all right, under supervision. It's required to help nurture that leadership capacity in a child. It's important. Problem solving, ask your child questions, let your child try. Sometimes kids are even more confident than you, the parent. The child will tell you, "Mama, let me try, I can't do it." You're like, "No, go, you will burn yourself." The child is eager to take a risk, to try. And all they need from you in that moment is to say, "Okay, come, let me show you how to do it. I will guide you." And then you're there to teach, to help the child actually be safe. To learn, safety is learned. It's also a skill. Safety is learned. You learned how to be safe in the kitchen. So you can teach that to your children. During the holiday program coming up, in about a few weeks' time, one of the things we encourage parents to teach their kids is how to be safe in the kitchen. Because that course is big on getting kids to practice in the kitchen. So we encourage the parents to teach their kids how to be safe. It's something that you can actually teach. You must teach safety. Don't put a child in the kitchen without having taught them safety. You are exposing your child to danger. There must be rules in your kitchen that kids understand that these rules are meant to keep you safe. In my home, my kids knew early on that we had our kitchen rules. They knew the kitchen rules. One of the rules was that if you're in the kitchen and you are maybe playing or you're doing any of those things that is prohibited in the kitchen, you get to leave the kitchen. Simple consequence. And that's how they were eventually able to internalize the things that they should not do in the kitchen. You don't play in the kitchen, you don't play with the cooker. Those are things we taught them. So when a child understands the rules of engagement, it helps the child to better be able to navigate. Instead of completely shutting out the child because you're scared. Can you hold a knife? How did you learn to hold a knife? You practice. You practice. You can start with a table knife. It's very safe. Get a child to peel plantains using a table knife. What are the chances of wounding yourself with a table knife? Slim to none. And then eventually the child can graduate. Once the child has tested, that they're able to handle the safe knife, then you can begin to go to other, devices that are a bit more dangerous. But first, you must test the child's ability, right? You want to validate your child's voice. Remember, I've said that a child who was not given a voice during childhood will become an adult that has nothing to say. I've worked in places where you see people have brilliant ideas, while in a meeting, everyone is chipping an idea, but they cannot speak. They can't speak. They have nothing to say. All right. So they are constantly, you have people walking over you. Sometimes the people we celebrate the most are people is because they have made themselves to be a doormat for us. That's why we love them, right? We love people who are like doormats because anything you ask, they are at your beck and call. We love people like that. But then what's the cost of being that kind of person? What's the cost? It's too costly. The cost is purpose. It's too costly. Because people pleasers are always focused on keeping others happy, many times at their own, at their own expense. I'm not talking about being selfish here. It's not about selfish, it's about having a wholesome sense of self-understanding that there's a lot we can learn from Jesus' time on earth. We see how he was pursuing purpose, but at the same time, you could not take him for granted. He was not a pushover. He was not at everybody's beck and call. He was not a pushover. So people think that being nice, is when you're nice to everybody. Christianity is about being nice all the time, saying yes to everybody. You cannot say yes to every person and fulfill purpose. It's not possible. It's not possible. There has to be a good amount of no's inside of them. That you say no and you don't go ahead and you're fighting guilt for the next 5 years. You're guilty. You're constantly, you can't, and that's why they are constantly trapped to keep saying yes, because the guilt. I tell parents that you see this thing of emotional blackmail, where a child will tell you, I don't want to do this, and you start blackmailing them. After everything I've done for you, you are an ungrateful child. Oh, I gave birth to you, I did this. We laugh at these kids that portray these things, but it is a very, very costly, it's a very, very damaging parenting technique. Because it raises a child who is going to be constantly cautious, constantly aware of what other people are thinking or feeling, that they will barely be able to pursue what it is that they are here to pursue. A parent who is constantly blackmailing their kids, so after everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. I cannot even send you here and you go. What kind of child is this? You make the child feel guilty. I tell parents that conscious talk, we keep glorifying it. It is a costly discipline approach. Very costly. Because you're going to raise a child who has a twisted perception of self. Because the conscious talk cannot be done without making the child feel excessively bad. Now, it will be kind of tolerable if the focus was mostly about making the child understand that what they did was bad. But for conscious talk to really work, at the core of it is the user's desire to want to make the child feel bad. Say, I made him feel bad. That's what the conscious talk is trying to accomplish, to make you feel bad. But the problem is that excessive feeling of I am bad takes away part of the child's self-esteem. One of the things that parents must learn is how to separate a child from their act. And the conscious talk cannot accomplish that, because for it to work again, the emphasis has to be on this thing that was very bad. So it's about making the child feel bad. It's about making the child feel bad. So the child ends up feeling bad. Not necessarily about the thing, but the child feels bad. All right. So model leadership qualities, of course. Now, that's why this is where the people-pleasing parent will often be defeated. That confidence in making decisions. You're not constantly being worried about what every other person will say. There are some parents who call their kids and advise them, if you do like that, your auntie will think like this. So you're constantly making your child to be too conscious of what other people are saying. or what other people are thinking. Too much of it is a problem. So show them how to stand firm by you standing firm. What do you believe as a parent? What do you believe as an individual? What are your beliefs? One of the things that my kids have seen me fight for is creating a safe learning environment for them at school. My kids know. They've seen me come up, and meet their teachers and try to advocate for what I believe true learning should be about. I've shared often that when the academic year begins, every Friday I'm in school, my kids' teachers know me already. Because I'm advocating. My kids, they see us advocating for what we believe in. It's very important that your kids see you advocating for standing firm on your values, defending what you believe. That's you modeling leadership skills. But again, the people pleasing parent will not be able to do this because they are too worried about what other people are thinking that they cannot even voice their opinions. They can't stand firm on their own beliefs. At the first sign of conflict, they have run away. You must embrace challenges with confidence. It's very crucial. So we cannot take off leadership, you modeling leadership from the table, because that is a key part of all of this. So good leadership starts in the home. It starts in the home. Great leaders are nurtured. They are not born, they are nurtured. So what's your example? What's your child learning about leadership from you day to day? Are they learning followership or are they learning leadership? Are they learning followership or leadership? Now, again, this is not just about authority position. It starts with leadership of self. I've said that over and again. So don't look at leadership as only authority figure. No, it's also about how well am I leading myself. That's the primary level of leadership, self leadership. All right. Thank you so much for listening. So we're talking about how not to raise a people pleaser, how much of a burden it is when a person is a people pleaser, when they constantly are worried about pleasing every person, usually at their own detriment. Please have you subscribed? Please subscribe to the channel. If you've not hit the subscribe button yet, please support what we're doing here by hitting that subscribe button to help us grow, to help us be able to reach more people. The more subscribers we have, the more visibility we get as a channel. Thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Even after the session is over, you can ask your questions, and I would always find time to come back to answer any questions that you might have. I hope from this you've learned something about raising a child who is grounded, a child who is confident, all right? Build skills. Build skills. Make skill building a priority on your parenting journey. Make skill building a priority on your parenting journey. Now, it is often said that readers are leaders. Why? Because reading helps you build your reservoir of knowledge. The more skillful you are, the more confident you become. So you want to raise a child that is an authority in a certain field, then you want to encourage reading. You want to, encourage the child to, to develop skills. You want to build skills. A child who knows how to do something is by default already confident because they know that they can handle it. Sometimes this shyness comes when there is ignorance. You're not sure. They're calling for someone to come and do something and you've never done it before. Your confidence level will be shaky for most people, especially for the one who fears failure. All right. So raise a child who understands that failure is not the end. I hope that you've been enlightened by this session. I hope that you've picked up a thing or two to help you, troubleshoot what you've been doing as a parent and to be able to make the necessary adjustments to help you raise a child that is confident, a child that is more and more skillful at leading themselves. We're going to go deeper into this topic at the Purposeful Parenting Conference coming up in Yaoundé, on the 16th and 17th of May. The theme of this conference is the purpose-driven parent, shaping tomorrow's leaders today. We're going to talk all about leadership, all right? Beginning from the foundations of leadership, going all the way up. We're going to look at leadership in the home. We're going to look at the father's role in leadership. We're going to look at how to nurture leaders from tender ages. It's something that we must be able to start doing early. But if you look at your own childhood, hardly did any of our parents, think of the leadership potential or think of, being intentional about teaching us to be leaders from when we were young. All right, I'll see you again next Thursday during our live session. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. So whenever I drop a video or I go live, you're going to get notified as well. Thank you and see you again in the next session. Bye.